You gotta help me. Losing my mind.
In New Zealand's first MMP election in 1996, Winston Peters campaigned on a promise of ending the reign of the national government.
If a coalition delivers up what you've had in the last 12 years, then we New Zealanders will have got ourselves exactly nowhere.
RNZ's Marie Hosking was at a post-election rally where the question of which way Mr Peters would go was very much in voters' minds.
And at least some of those who braved the rain to turn out were still warning it not to help National back into power.
I can see him leaning one way, which I hope he doesn't, but I'm not saying which way it is.
We can see it leading towards National. Everyone thinks that too. He should be going with what he said. He said he'll never, ever go into government with Bolger, Birch or Shipley. He told us that, so why doesn't he stick to his guns?
But after 7 weeks of negotiation, Mr Peters shook hands with National leader Jim Bolger and they formed New Zealand's first MMP government.
There will be those supporters and New Zealanders who will be very disappointed with our decision this evening. However, a decision had to be made that had the closest regard to our stated election policies and to the best interests of all New Zealanders.
2 years later, he was booted from the cabinet after a dispute over the privatisation of Wellington International Airport. In a 2005 interview with The Voice booth, Mr Peters spoke of lessons learned.
The other party I was with had changed its leader, or had a leadership coup designed to get rid of us as well, and got a whole lot of my colleagues to sell their souls, in my view, for promotion, to keep ministerial jobs and to walk out on our commitments. That was a terrible low point.
The 1999 and 2003 elections went to Labour-led coalitions, but Mr Peters and New Zealand First were back in the frame as kingmaker in 2005. In the RNZ podcast, The Ninth Floor, Ms Clark talked about whether Mr Peters had asked to share the Prime Ministership during the 96 negotiations.
Might have been loosely floated, but not. That wasn't the sticking point. I think Finance Minister was the sticking point.
Mr Peters didn't get shared PM in 2005, instead becoming Foreign Minister and Minister for Racing. And he almost made it through the whole term, but was stood down just ahead of the 2008 election over undeclared donations to his party. Not a great track record for coalition success, but Mr Peters has shown he can bury the hatchet to make a deal. Radio New Zealand reporter Catherine Wilson covered a 2005 post-election speech where Mr Peters described how he saw any coalition working.
We will not oppose a motion on confidence in supply, in the sense that if that motion comes, then we would withhold our vote. So with one exception, where a group of other parties seeks to gang up against a minority government, then we would use our vote on confidence in supply to maintain that government.
Winston Peters says New Zealand First will act according to constitutional convention by talking to the party which gains the most seats first.
A decade later, Mr Peters says his position then had been misinterpreted.
I never used the word constitutional convention. I just said there's a convention that in the first place you would go to the party with the highest votes. I never used the word constitution. Mr Espinard, words matter. You're a trained man. Please stick to what I said.
But in 2005, Mr Peters did tell Checkpoint that 1996 had taught him not to take too long.
I understand the public think we took too long and we won't be doing it this time.
You understand the public think you took too long because what you've been asking them, you've been talking to people about it?
No, but because they have believed the media spin on this, and so we've got to take account of that. And so we're not going to give the media a chance to make that sort of criticism this time because, frankly, they had no idea what the process was. No one did. We had done our best to study it overseas, and it wasn't a long time in overseas terms. But the reality is, having learned from the experience, we can take much shorter time this time in 2005, and by writ day, when that's the date when we will know what the final results are, we will have decided.
Nearly a decade later, Mr Peters appears to be sticking with that plan.
What I said I was going to do is precisely what I'm going to do, and you'll know that date is the 12th, Thursday the 12th of October.
So now we wait. Mō te hōtaka o te ata, ko Liz Garten tēnei.